Right, good morning, afternoon, evening. You joined me in the Retropower kitchen where I'm making a coffee badly, but I'm making it in a Retropower mug, so it's alright. Available in our web shop, I might add. We've already fast forwarded to having the coffee and the sugar in there because Jamie forgot to turn the camera on the first time. Or something to that effect. Bit of milk. Oh, I think I've actually done a reasonable job of that, unusually.
It's just a brower and milk.
There we go. Right, let's have a little wander and see what the devil's been going on this week. So actually we're filming earlier than normal. We normally film on the Thursday and send out and put it up on the Sunday, but because it's a bank holiday, to give Jamie behind the camera there any chance of actually editing it on time, we're filming on the Wednesday. So you'll probably notice less has happened since last week. I'm going to start with the Mustang. So you might have noticed in previous episodes there were various bits of it that hadn't been polished up. They had like a matte finish on them. The headlight surrounds, or one of the headlight surrounds, both of the rear end sort of cappings around the rear light and the bonnet, which had been painted and wet flatted, but they'd never been polished up. I can't even remember offhand why that was now. But they've just been taken next door, polished up and put back on the car. And Adam's been working away. We finally pretty much got there with the alignment of all the windows. They were an absolute swine is the word I'll use on this occasion, for being polite. But yeah, they weren't much fun at all. I think through a combination of the fact we had everything aftermarket, so you know, the replacement complete door assemblies, the quarters, everything that all of the glass attaches to, and all the mechanisms that lift them, and the glass, all of those parts were aftermarket replacements. So I think the stack up of small errors throughout every single one of those things that invariably exists meant that they did take a lot of fettling to get them perfect. So yeah, it's been a bit traumatic on that, but we got through that. Adam's been working on the parcel shelf next. So we just mounted some speakers in the shelf on the back there. So we've made a hardboard shelf. It's going to be wrapped in black vinyl, and it's just got a pair of 6x9s that the customer supplied. There are actually holes in the rear parcel shelf panel, the structural panel on the shell, which I assume weren't there originally, because I can't imagine 6x9s were a thing back in the 1960s. But certainly the parcel shelf panel that we got when we replaced all the metalwork on the car has 6x9 holes in it conveniently. So we were just making some little spacer rings so that the panel doesn't get pulled down into those recesses when you bolt the speakers in, and then making up the panel. So he's about done with that. And yeah, we're sort of in a position now to start chipping forward with the interior. He's offering up the interior rear trim panels at the minute. They're ready to go in now because the window mechs are all done. And then with the parcel shelf done, to be honest, we can get the back seat in. Door cards are ready to go on. We've got a new replacement carpet here, I believe now. The only real remaining thing is the front seats. And we previously got hold of, you might remember, some 2016 Mustang seats which looked like they might have potential to work, and we'd seen online some people that had fitted them in, you know, this era Mustang. But to be honest, there's no real chance they'll fit, not without taking off so much of the sort of mechanical parts of the subframes, where all the motors are that adjust the height, etc., that there would be no point using those seats anymore. So we'll get those back up for sale, sell them on and go with something different. Probably just a set of classic Recaros or something which will then re-upholster to match the rest of the interior. But we're just trying to get something that's reasonably slim and looking, but much more supportive than the original seats. That's the gist. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. Vader, I say this while dropping coffee everywhere. Vader, I think I touched on the fact the clutch slave had failed on it. We've now got the AP replacement cylinder that we're using. Andy managed to machine the adapter for that over the weekend. So that was top marks to him for getting that turned around really quickly. James is literally just installing that clutch slave in the gearbox now. And also, while we're at it, there was a tiny weep from the rear crank seal on the engine, so that went back to Paul Exon, who built the engine for us. Again, top marks to him. he'd sorted that straight out for us overnight, and new seal in there, resealed the sump, resealed the cap in the block that holds the rear crank seal in. So that's ready to go back in. So as soon as that clutch slave's installed on that, we'll get engine and gearbox back together, stick them in. We also, while we were at it, another change we did was the mounts. They're Mark 1/2 World Cup crossmember mounts. Those in the Escort world will be familiar with that term, but essentially on the rally cars, one of the modifications they did is that they changed from the sort of bobbin type engine mount to using one of the leaf spring shackle bushes with a sort of fabricated steel sleeve around it, which meant that essentially, even if that bush completely disintegrated, the engine couldn't come off its mounts because the bolt going through the mount would still be captive within the cylinder that the bush once was in. So it's essentially making it fail safe. Now, it's a very common technique to use, but the bushes that are commonly on the market are insanely rigid. They're like 70, 80 Shaw when we've measured them. And we first encountered this problem doing Gordon's car because the engine vibration transmission to the shell was just not really acceptable. So we ended up making our own. We basically had the tooling done to make our own bushes, exactly the same, but with a softer compound rubber in them. So after we did a few trials and settled on 45 Shaw, I think it was in the end, which absolutely transformed the way Gordon's car felt. And then we've used them on most of the other cars we've used with that setup since, but when we built this, we didn't have any in stock. So it went on one of the original sets, and we thought, well, we happen to have some in stock now. So we decided it was a good opportunity to swap those in. Which brings me on to the fact that they are now available. Now, amazingly, that every time we get them in, we think, oh, there can't be that many people wanting these, and then they immediately sell out. And the same thing happened again. I think we had 10 pairs of them made and sold them like overnight. So what we're doing now is we're going to sell them to pre-order. So if you go on our website, you can actually pre-order those bushes, and I think we're going to do the next batch in July. I think it is June or July. So if you want to buy a set now, we'll just get you on the list, and then we'll know how many to get made and send them out when they're done. So that's that. Clipper. John's been on with fuel system. So on this, we're using an internal lift pump on the tank, which is feeding a very small 1 litre swirl pot, which is under the boot floor, which has got a submersed Bosch 044 high pressure pump in it, which will then feed the fuel rail. So John's been mounting that surge pot underneath, planning the routing of the lines, getting the clips in place for that. And he's going to start very shortly now running the high pressure lines underneath the car. But as a brief break at the moment, we're also mounting the brake servo. So we're using a remote servo on this. It's got a bias pedal box in it, which has got separate cylinders, hydraulic clutch as well. So it's got 3 cylinders in the car behind the dash, one obviously for front and rear brakes, one for clutch. And John's just in the process of plumbing all that now. So he's running the lines from the cylinders across to bulkhead fittings on the near side of the car. They'll then run really neatly down the chassis leg to the remote servo unit, which we're mounting on the near side chassis leg. Then the reservoir lines go through, and there's some little reservoir pots just in the scuttle area on the offside. And then George has just been doing the bracketry to mount the remote servo unit, which is yet another handy use for our 3D scanning setup. So he scanned the whole servo, scanned the inner wing, and then imported both those into CAD, so he could then CAD up it is just a sheet metal fabricated bracket, but in Fusion 360 you can do sheet metal parts and basically fold them, create them as a folded sheet metal part, and then open it out, so we can then CNC plasma cut it out, and it takes into account things like the bend radiuses. So when you actually bend a sheet metal piece, you lose some length in the bend in the fold, so it actually accounts for things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much ready to make those brackets. We've just got to mount that on the inner wing now, and we can finish the brake plumbing. So yeah, we're essentially in the plumbing stage, fuel plumbing, brake plumbing, and then I think the next thing, once we've tackled that, is going to be the supercharger. So we're putting a Rotrex supercharger on this, and that probably will again involve some 3D scanning, just because it's an easy way to create brackets and mounts. So we'll scan the engine block at the front, scan the Rotrex charger, and then we'll be able to offer the two up virtually and create a bracket, which will probably be a CNC machine from billet bracket, to mount that. And then once that's in, we can look at doing the plumbing to the intercooler. So yeah, all looking good on that front. I'm standing in the place where the Morris was. That's just gone next door. The guys are going to start wet flatting and buffing the paint. So we paused on that because they were really busy with the Land Cruiser stuff, and we wanted to let the paint harden off for a bit. We got the Morris rolling and did some mechanical work on it but nothing that involved bolting anything to the body, so we could still wet sand it and buffing, and there was no time lost. And we'd got to the point where we couldn't go that much further without starting to bolt parts onto the outside of it. So it's now gone next door for them to now wet sand the paint and buff it to get the final paint finish. Before it did, this morning Max has been over to do the measure up for the wiring loom. So yesterday I did all the wiring planning, did a list of every component that was going to go onto the car. I then print out labels for all those parts, put them all on the car where they're going to go. We'd already planned out the routing in terms of mounts for cables, holes for where they're going to run through bulkheads, etc. So I then basically tape out wires into all those runs where I know they're going to go, so Max can come in, measure up everything, put his input into it, take all the information away, and then he'll go away and make the wiring loom, which I'll go into more detail on when it gets here. So yeah, that was the last step before the car went back next door. Then I'm going to wax oil that and then start the wet sanding and buffing. And then E-Type's probably the last remaining thing to talk about in here. George has been continuing flat out work on the design phase of the E-Type. So I think last week we showed we'd done a full 3D scan of the whole car, and for the first time we've actually managed to do a full visual render of the entire car with the changes to the rear, and we've done various updates on that. So there were things we weren't quite happy with. We've now inflated the size of the rear haunch, as I call it, at the back there slightly. We edited the shape of the rear wheel arches. We also made a final decision on the rear wheel size in terms of wheel diameter, width, tyre profile, and modelled those wheels and tyres. So we could do a full visual render with all the changes, the wheels and tyres we're going to have on it, and that's looking awesome. I'm really, really happy with that now. So we're going to now turn our attention to the front, the bumper design on the front, maybe doing some tweaks to the front arch shape, and keep progressing forward until we've essentially got the whole exterior render done, so we can visually say, yeah, that looks awesome, and then start refining the details so we can actually make the jigs for making the panels, or actually machining the parts from the drawings of things like the bumpers, etc. So yeah, great progress all round. Utah should be test driving very soon. Unfortunately, we've had a spate of bad weather, but hopefully as soon as we get a dry road, I'll be out in that. One finishing touch on that I forgot to mention last week was the little Jaguar badge for the back. We wanted to do that kind of old school, I think it's lozenge badge as I'd refer to it to, of a particular size in a nice metal form. So we actually drew up the badge, had it machined by Andy at Concept 303, and then infilled it all with black urethane paint, kind of in the embossed parts. So it got a really nice kind of vintage enamel badge look to it, and that'll be going on the middle of the boot lid just to finish that off. So that's where we're at with all of that. I'm going to hand over to Nat now to see what's going on in the metal workshop. So I'll see you next week. Right, well, thank you, Cal, and welcome to Retropower Fabrication, the dark side of the moon. I've got my coffee mug again because I need it. And yeah, we've got lots of progress occurring on Project 1, the MK1 Escort again. Tom's actually doing a bit of spot welding in the boot as we speak, with the old spot welder now, because we've got a couple of little bits where we couldn't quite get in with the new spot welder. But as you can see, we now have a rear panel on. It's been slower progress than the last couple of weeks this week, for a variety of reasons, which I'll explain. The rear panel went in okay. We've got a few repairs to do to the boot floor before that could go in. Both sides of the boot floor had some rotting. Now, I was originally going to replace the whole boot floor, and I did originally order one. There was a bit of a miscommunication, and it got cancelled off the order. Now, as it is, having then further looked at it, we decided actually it was probably slower to change the boot floor than it was to repair it, and that was definitely borne out now it's been done. Tom's repaired both sides of that very quickly. That didn't take too long at all. And the thinking behind not changing it was that by the time you've removed all the spot welds from the top of the chassis rails, it's a fairly long drawn out job. And the fact is we've got to remove sort of from about there to about there, we've got to cut out the boot floor anyway. So we'd be replacing it simply to cut a large chunk of it out. So we concluded we'd be better off repairing what was there on the grounds that we were going to be cutting a chunk of it out. So that's been repaired, new edges made and a few bits tidied up in there, and then there was quite a bit of rework on the rear panel. Not terrible, but the light apertures were not the correct shape. And one end, not this end, but the equivalent of this piece that side behind Tom there, that was about 3 mil short, so it actually canted the quarter panel over a little bit and made the light aperture too short on the top side, that side. So refolded that, altered that, reshaped these pieces. I need to do a final bit of finishing off around this flange when we've just double checked all the fit of everything. And a lot of sorting out of the flanges and general fettling of all these bits and crisping everything up and generally making it all nice and neat so it all fits crisply and cleanly. That was all done at the beginning of the week. So that's now in place. The boot, you'll take it from me that the boot fits well. We've got wires in, so I can't show you now, but we've got a good fit all the way down here, slightly wider at there than there, but nothing that's going to be a problem once we've had a final tweak of everything. So no, we're really happy with the fit on that. Thank you. A couple of people had mentioned a chap's name with a review to carbon fibre panels for this, and I've actually literally just been chatting on WhatsApp to the chap that was mentioned, and we are just in the process of ordering the bonnets and boots for the 2 Mark 1 Escort projects from him. So thank you for the recommendation. Hopefully they'll all be good, but certainly the photos he sent of the panels he makes do look extremely good. So hopefully all should be good, and that'll get us, because as you may remember from previous episodes, we've got the old bonnet and boot which are no good. They're scrap, but they're useful for alignment purposes. But in terms of bonnets and boots for the actual finished cars, we don't have anything at the moment. We were toying with the idea of holding fire to see if Magnum came up with the steel panels, but I don't know. That's a bit of an unknown date still at the moment for those. It should be, they will be getting them this year apparently, but it's an unknown date, and I can't really sort of wait on an unknown date. And also we don't know. I mean, hopefully they will fit really well, but they might not, and we don't know. So rather than all the unknowns there, we're going to go with carbon fibre bonnet and boot, which we did on Gordon's car. Also had carbon fibre bonnet and boot actually as well. So yeah, that's the route we're going there. So yeah, boot floor repairs, rear panels done. We finished off some spot welding on the offside body side. That was largely fitted last week, but we finished off the last spot welding on that. Finished off a few bits of spot welding on here. Spot welded the tops of the body sides to the roof frame, and again double checked all the dimensions on there. And then we've started and then we've hit the brick wall of misery panel fits. The doors are not very good. Putting it bluntly, yeah, they don't fit. We've had to cut the hinges off this near side door. We've had to cut the hinges off and relocate them. They were 9mm out of position relative to the outside. Basically, the measurement from the outside face of the skin to the hinge pin axis was 9mm too far away from the outer skin. Which meant that whatever you do, the door wasn't going to fit. We could move the hinge pin axis on the car, which would defeat the object of having the jig for them, but we could move the hinge pin axis on the car. However, if you do that, it means that the pivot axis is too far inboard, and it would mean then that the front of the panel would collide with things it wasn't supposed to collide with. So we'd create further problems by trying to work around that. So we've ended up cutting the hinges off the door, making a little fixture up to reposition them to the correct position, re-welding the hinges to the door, and then we've done a bit of cutting and moving of the hinges on the pillar to fine-tune the fit, because the door shape isn't the same as original. We've got some work to do here. We've refolded some edges, and we're going to have to build up some weld on here because the shape's not right there. There's a few other bits of correction to do. The bottom of the door is wavy. There's a big dip in the bottom where the skin's clinched around the frame. There's a big wave in that. That needs sorting out, so we're going to have to unfold part of that and refold that to get that correct. And then the folding round on the top here is not really correct either, so we've got a bit of work to do there as well, and a bit of work to do here. The swage lines don't line up, but I think we're going to lead this swage line very slightly to get them. It's nothing too drastic, but the swage lines are never going to line up as they are at the moment. So we've got there's a chunk of work. You know, there's basically a day's work for 2 people gone into making that door nearly fit. So yeah, the progress is the pace of progress is going to back down a bit from where it was, because the next thing we've moved on to is then trying to get for this side of the car, trying to get the wing fitted to the door, and that's even more of a game. The wing needs a lot of rework. We've now got to the stage where we've removed the reinforcer from the back top part of the wing and all the rear of the wing. We've completely detached all that now, and we're reworking the outside of the wing to be the correct shape, and then we're going to refit, modify, probably remake the upper reinforcer that sits around here. Probably just going to remake that one completely, and then the reinforcer that mounts the wing to the A pillar down there, we'll reshape that and reuse that. But basically we're going to redo that, and all has had to be detached from the wing to get the wing to fit properly. The shape's nowhere near correct. So we're reworking that. We need to rework the swage line as well. The swage line is not crisp enough to match this. The swage line is very crisp on the quarter panels and on the door, and then it becomes very indistinct on the wing. So we've got to rework the swage line on there as well. It's kind of par for the course with panels, but it's easy to forget that a lot of the Magnum panels, particularly I don't really know the difference in source of them, but the silver Magnum panels all do seem to be extremely good, whereas the black Magnum panels, for some reason, seem to be a lot less good, and I don't really know. Somebody else will know better than me why that is. But we're on a rework mission, basically from the door pillar all the way around to the other door pillar. We've got a lot of work in terms of reshaping panels, as far as I can see. We measured up the hinges on the other door; they're a lot closer to correct, so hopefully be a little bit less work on that side. But that's where we're at now, is basically progressing with that. We were just finishing off a couple of spot welds in the back, as I say, but the main work at the minute is getting the wings somewhere near being able to fit the car. So that's watch this space for more progress next week on getting some panels to fit. So that's where we're at there. In the body prep area, we've got a mixture of tasks going on. I'll open the door a little bit so we can see in. We've got all sorts of things going on. We've got Steve prepping panels for the Land Cruiser. We'll show you the Land Cruiser in a minute. That's in the booth. The main body tub's in the booth. Mark's doing flatting work on Morris panels, and Gaz has just wax oiled his cavities on the Morris. He's just wax oiling inside all the hollow sections, anywhere where paint might not be, basically, before it gets wet, because that's then going to be wet flatted next and polished. So that's the sort of next stage on the car. So he's just making sure that everywhere's masked up, so we don't have too much cleanup to do afterwards, and that the wax oil's got in anywhere where the water might get in and there might not be paint. So that's what's going on in here. And then under the sheet at the back, you can see a huge sort of selection of primed and prepped and flatted and literally ready for paint Land Cruiser panels there. And then the few that you can see dotted about on stands are the ones that are primed, just awaiting the final prep, which is what Steve's getting through. So it's all hands to the pumps in here on all multiple routes of progress. So yeah, that next week. Hopefully by the end of next week we should be somewhere near paint finished on Morris or thereabouts-ish, and then also in parallel with that, paintwork being done on Land Cruiser. So that's going to take shape pretty quickly now. All the many hours of sanding are finally drawing to a close, and we're at the stage of it becoming coloured and looking quite smart. So we'll have a look in the booth in a little bit, but we'll go over first and see what Rich is up to, because it's all hands to many different pumps here. I've got to leave Scott out because he's working on things that we won't be covering. So I feel a bit bad leaving Scott out each week here, but he's busy nonetheless. I just can't talk about what he's doing. Rich was working in this area. He's scarpered. I think he's sensed us coming and scarpered. That's it. His vacuum pump's running. I thought I could hear a vacuum leak. Rich is doing a bit of composite work, something you don't see us doing very often, but he's doing a bit of work. We keep getting asked about Jensen and what's happening with Jensen. Well, the Jensen is having some work done on it. Finally, we're getting on to the work with the roof tool that we showed a few weeks back, the MDF tool that we had machined by KS Composites to allow us to put a return into the roof panel on the Jensen. Still remember, this is only a book, so this is a tool to make a section to let into the roof, to then laminate into the roof on there, simply to form a book, which we can then take a mould from to make a carbon fibre body. Bit of a long process, but we need to make this section. You can see the multiple steps in this without going into tons of detail. Basically, the steps are for, that step will be where the glass will sit in the roof. We're doing a curved, laminated, LCD darkening glass, one-off glass roof panel for the car. That step there will be where the glass will sit in the roof. That will marry with the original roof height. That step, obviously this is upside down back to front and anyhow. That's the original roof height. That's where the glass will sit. That's a return which will do two jobs. One, prevent water dripping if you get heavy condensation on the inside, and two, give us something to attach a headlining to, because obviously we've got to get a headliner round to cover all this on the inside and then have some sort of point to finish that headliner at before you get to the glass. So that's what's going on there, which is vacuum pumps merrily cooking away underneath, drawing this lot down. This is fiberglass, polyester resin, only very, very, very simple, but Rich is using vacuum to get this in rather than just normal wet lay, no vac. He's vacuuming in just to get into the returns a little better. This is the second pass on this. He's vacuumed it down once, and then while it was still green, he's done another layup on it, and he's vacuuming it down again. So hopefully it's got into the corners. Inevitably somewhere it won't have done, but they're quite tight corners. The rads are a little bit tighter than we'd perhaps have gone for. So he's done it in two passes to try and make sure that gets right in there. Hopefully it has. Fingers crossed. We'll find out probably tomorrow, I'm guessing. If it may, I don't know whether we'll release it tomorrow. Yeah, probably will release it tomorrow, I'm assuming. So we'll find out tomorrow whether it's all gone to plan or not. Hopefully it has. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. Stu's still on holiday. So I won't be covering anything on that because he's actually back in. He's back somewhere in the vicinity. He had been on Orkney, but he's now back somewhere in the vicinity. I don't quite know where he is now, but he's been on holiday anyway. So yeah, I think next week again we'll see some progress back on Churchill again, which I'm sure everybody will be keen because it's quite spectacular to see that. I'm going to very quickly run off up here. I'm going to leave Jamie behind. I'm going to run up here and turn a light on so that we can see in the booth. And there we go. We've got a trolley in the way, but in here we now have the Land Cruiser in its, we don't normally apply Raptor in a textured finish. However, for this particular job, the discussion with the customer was that we wanted a textured finish, a sort of tough, purposeful, utilitarian finish to the inside of the vehicle. Because that's the whole principle of it, and that's what Gaz has done after a few trials and test pieces to make sure we've got a reasonably consistent process that was reasonably repeatable. Gaz has done a lovely job of this now, and we've got a nice fine textured finish over the whole inside. And this is the final colour that the car's going to. It's a beige, a sort of a light beige colour that we're going to end up with. And so the Raptor's done underneath, and I believe it's done underneath, I'm saying that? Yes, the Raptor's done underneath, much heavier underneath, so we've got good stone protection, good durability underneath. Remember that, again, going back slightly, remember the whole of this body tub is also zinc metal sprayed. So in addition, we've got incredible level of corrosion protection. It basically, rust will not happen. It's never going to. Rust is just not an issue. It won't happen. But yeah, we've got zinc metal spray underneath and inside, and then we've got very heavy Raptor coating on the underside. So we've got good durability there, and then a much lighter but finely textured coating on the inside, just to give us that aesthetic but durable finish on the inside. So yeah, that's probably a good place to finish for this week. We have Land Cruiser in the beginnings of final paint and the body tub all in Raptor. So next week we'll see lots more beige.